hit record on the camera. I'm ready.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for turning up to this candidates forum hosted by Merribek House, Sustainable Faulkner, Progress, Merribek Progress Group, and Climate Action Merribek. These four very aligned groups have come together to ask a few questions and to engage with the candidates to find out what they're about and to find out why they're doing what they're doing. First, I must acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. This is unceded land. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that acknowledgement to any Indigenous people present here today and any Indigenous people who may be watching the recording. Few housekeeping bits and pieces. If there is a fire, this is your main exit point. Please leave in an orderly fashion and assemble at the car park down there. Toilets are just behind you. There are both cubicles and urinals, as you must. And thank you to North Cobra Rebel Baseball Club for allowing us the use of this brand new refurbished building. It's great, and it is the only baseball club in
the city of Merribek.
Yep. The city of Merribek.
Apologies for the plumber, we didn't know he was coming today.
Which just adds to the flavor. Adds to that flavor. Thank you also to the folks who have turned up today, both our audience and our candidates. We have invited all four candidates who are standing in the Bababi-Djinanang board. We have invited, as you can see, Hussaan Gul from the ALP, Sue Bolton from Socialist Alliance. We invited Lance Sinclair from the Greens. He's unable to attend, but very kindly sent Councillor Adam Pulford as proxy, and we invited Hussaan Gul, no, I believe he said Hussaan Gul, Lance, no, Lynton Joseph, who is an independent candidate. Lynton Joseph sent his apologies, as he may be working and not make it. Hussaan Gul replied about 10 minutes ago to say that he's not coming. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. So how this is going to work is fairly straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to invite the candidates to present a very short speech of about 4 minutes. We're going to go in alphabetical order by last name. Then we're going to ask a few questions. Our questions, because we are four groups that are very aligned in our focuses, so we focus on environmental sustainability, our focus is food security, and our focus is what we can do with community and communities together. Our questions will focus around that. Candidates will be given 1 minute to respond to each question.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yep, to respond to the question.
Yes.
And then at the end, they will have 2 minutes to sum up their position. We'll ask that everyone, of course, be civil and respectful, both to each other and to the candidates. We want to create a safe and welcoming space, as we do any community gathering in Merribek. So first, we'll start off with the brief introduction of the candidates. So we're starting in alphabetical order. Sue Bolton. So you have 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
I'll give you a little wave at 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great, because I don't know how long I've prepared. I haven't really properly written it down. So, thanks everyone for coming.
Can you use the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Oh,
thank you. It's good. Yeah, it's fine.
Hello. Is that
It's
right?
fine.
Okay, all good. So, my name is Sue Bolton. I'm currently on council, and I've actually been on council for 3 terms, and I have decided to stand again. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that we're standing on stolen land, the land of the Wurundjeri people, the Wurundjeri Nation, Wurundjeri language group, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, future, but also I'd like to pay respects to Aboriginal freedom fighters, because, you know, we'll probably never know most of their names, but they actually fought very hard for their country. As other people have done around the world. And I guess I think one of the things that I bring to council is I do have a bit of a different approach to other councillors. I'm more of an activist councillor, and I take up issues, as well as taking up issues that affect individuals, which are issues that do affect just a particular individual or you know, such as maybe a broken footpath outside someone's house. But also I do have an activist approach on council, so that if bureaucrats are trying to trample on the rights of the community, I like to not just be a single voice in the council, but actually take those issues out into the community. And I think that that's been very important, and I think that's why I've had a number of victories on council, despite most of my time on council only being a single vote. And some examples of that would be before the school, where the council was, I found out in early 2021 that they were planning, the council was planning to close the outdoor pool, but they weren't open with the community about that. They said they were going to repurpose the outdoor pool, and then when I questioned them on that, they said repurpose and close and replace with a water feature, but they didn't want to talk about it. And I didn't want the community to wake up and find the pool was closed after the fact, after it had been closed. I wanted us to have a chance to save it. So I went to the community and we built a community campaign, and we actually gradually won over each of the councillors, and we got a unanimous decision to save the pool. Whereas if I hadn't have done that, it would have just been my vote and maybe my vote plus a couple of others against the closure, but we would have lost the pool. So I think that's the important approach I take on council. I did a similar thing around the toxic site in Faulkner, which is where Agent Orange used to be produced, and we stopped that particular development, but we haven't resolved the issue permanently for all time because the toxins still sit underneath the clay cap. I had a similar approach with aged care, although there wasn't as much of a community campaign, but the council was planning to sell off or get rid of its aged care in the home service. Many councils have done it. Sorry, I should move on. Okay. I also organise many regular community meetings, and these meetings are very valuable. I don't vet what people have to say, but they've resulted in something such as the Merribek Park dog park and other issues as well. I've taken up many traffic, pedestrian, cyclist safety issues on council, and one of the things I want to push for is pedestrian lights at the crossing at Duke's Road outside the chemist shop, and more spending on footpaths and traffic safety around Faulkner Primary School. Other things which I might sort of finish on with something in case I don't get a chance to finish it. I'll leave other things maybe for discussion. But I guess maybe a couple of other things. I've been working very strongly around the issue of disability and especially accessible tram stops on Sydney Road. And
a wrap-up sentence.
Yep, wrap-up sentence.
Yeah.
And the last point I'd like to make is that on the question of social justice, a lot of people would know I moved a motion on council to call for an end, for an immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza. I believe councils should take up social justice issues, whether it's the human rights of a homeless person or broader human rights issues. And many people in the community are hurting as a result of the genocide in Gaza, and we do have a responsibility to take a position on issues like that. And one last parting point is that if I'm re-elected, I'd like to relaunch the campaign to duplicate the upper row.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks very much, Sue. Adam, about plans?
Hi everyone, my name is Adam Pulford. I'm the current mayor of Merribek and one of the North East councillors alongside Sue on council, and I'm here representing Lance, who's our candidate for this ward, who couldn't be here this evening, unfortunately. Also want to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I think a lot of people in this room know that here in Victoria, Aboriginal people are leading the way towards treaty. It's the most progressed jurisdiction in all of the country working towards a treaty. Treaty recognises Aboriginal people as the experts on their own lives. It's about making sure they have the ability to make the decisions that affect their country, their culture and their communities. Negotiations with the state government on treaty are about to begin. That's in the First People's Assembly of Victoria. I'd just like to give them a plug because they're traditional owners who are doing their hard yards, working out what a treaty could look like and kind of leading the way for mob all across the country. So I got elected to council in this ward at the end of 2020. It was a very interesting campaigning during COVID. And I really love living in Merribek. I'm not originally from here. Actually, I probably shouldn't talk too much about me personally because I'm not the candidate here. But yes, I've found home here in Merribek and made my home here. And I love our thriving and diverse and progressive community. And it's been a real privilege to be mayor this year. This year on council, Greens have worked hard to make sure we're supporting good quality housing being built in our community and more affordable housing. It's particularly important in a housing crisis where people are struggling to find places to live, and it's an incredibly competitive rental and housing market out there. So we do need to create more homes in our community, particularly around transport corridors and services, schools, shops, jobs. So kind of all of those major strips in our community like Lygon, Sydney Road, Nicholson. We've also worked hard to make sure we're changing our streets so they're greener and safer for everybody to get around, whether they're walking or riding or driving or rolling on scooters. And it's something that I've been proud to push. One of the budget processes we ran during this term, we had 120 people write to us about their views on the budget, and 80 of those people said you need to be doing much more to make our streets safer for walking and riding. And so I led the process of seeing if we could bring forward some of our active transport infrastructure projects so we can make those changes faster and more people can get out of their cars and onto bikes safely, which is good for the environment because it cuts emissions. It's good for social connection because you're actually interacting with people if you're walking or riding. It's good for health because there's less air pollution. So yeah, the Greens will always be pushing for for better active transport and safer streets and greener streets. And one thing the Greens will, so looking forward to the next term, you probably get a similar thing out of the Greens, continuing to push for safer, greener streets, more good quality housing. We want to support a treaty, a local treaty with the Wurundjeri Woi people. That will be possible after the statewide treaty is negotiated. And we want to keep supporting artists and art organisations in our community because, and that's why housing is so important as well, especially as housing prices rise and rents rise, people are priced out and we risk really losing what we love about our community, our diversity, our artists, our creatives. So we need to be doing much more in housing. But looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. I just realised that we don't have any water, so we do need some water. I don't, but I'm sure someone could nip to the kitchen and get some. Thank you.
That's right. Do you want me to fill you?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
We can actually drink the water in there.
Hussaan Gul and Lynton Joseph are not present to provide their statements, so we will move on to questions. The first question that we're going to ask is on food security. So in Faulkner, specifically, which forms the largest part of the Bababi-Djinanang board. The social economic status of the population is at its lowest, and food insecurity is at its highest. Coupled with that, we have the largest family sizes per household, and the lowest disposable income. And all this is from the ABS. What are your thoughts on food security, not just people who are at crisis point, facing crisis point food insecurity, but the entire spectrum of food security? And that might mean, you know, an ad hoc, I'm not having food immediately, or having food insecurity without hunger is the term, I guess. What are your thoughts? Sue?
I don't think there's any really super easy answers. The council does have a food strategy, which I believe is sort of up for renewal soon or now. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But one thing that I feel, which is, I know you're talking about not just people in real hunger, but at the moment there are a lot of people who are not eligible for any kind of government support. They're excluded from food bank. A lot of food banks insist on you having a healthcare card to access food banks, which means that a lot of low-income workers who might be struggling with housing costs, or asylum seekers, refugees, people who come from New Zealand, people on temporary work visas are excluded from any kind of emergency support. And I believe that council should provide more support for organisations that are providing emergency relief of any kind, might be food, but might be other sorts of relief. So that's it. Oh, okay, sorry. I needed a longer answer, but anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm sure if, you know, folks want to know more, they'll follow up questions, but... Yeah.
2 minutes?
What is the time?
We've got it down as 1 minute.
Yeah, maybe would you like to speak a little bit more? Maybe let's do 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so the no, that's okay. So the other side of the coin is, yeah, so I mean, firstly, just on that food bank thing, if you're a low-income worker, you have to hunt out a social worker who's prepared to vouch for you that you deserve access to a food bank, basically. So people have to drive around and hunt around for social work. It's a very bad situation. So that's why council needs to provide more support. But on the other side of the question, there's also a need, and there have been are various projects, and including Merribek Club, but other projects as well. And so hopefully coming out of council's urban agriculture, out of council's food strategy is an expansion of the question of urban agriculture. There have been various projects, not all of which function on top, because sometimes they've run out of steam because of limits on volunteer resources, of projects uniting people who might have big backyards that they can't do vegetable gardens in, but they're matching them up with people who want to create vegetable gardens in those areas. I also feel there needs to be...
Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, so earlier this year we passed our next stage of the food system strategy, and Faulkner has really been a site of kind of leading the way for council's involvement in food security, whether it's Merry Food Hub or the Faulkner Commons and the Faulkner Food Bowl. Faulkner Food Bowl?
Food bowls, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think the Faulkner Commons has ended, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's been various groups here kind of leading the way, and particularly, when it comes to food security, something that I hadn't thought about before, but these groups really put front and foremost was, it's not just about the availability of food, it's obviously about the culturally appropriateness of food. And if you're giving, particularly if people are receiving food or material aid, and you're just giving them like a bag of, carrots and capsicums, and they're like, well, I usually cook with okra or something else. It needs to be appropriate. Councils don't typically get involved in the food. It's not a direct responsibility of council, although I know people will argue that it is, to do food system stuff. So when you're a decision maker and you're trying to fund these important projects, you've got to work out where to take that funding from. So I think I'm really proud that the community and council's backed some community efforts to explore this space, and we are still kind of exploring that. I think it's always going to be a tension on council though, because I think food security sits more with the state government, and so while we can do work in this space, it's like, okay, do we, where do we fund that money? Is it from our tree planting budget, or is it from our various other budgets? But as the cost of living crisis is hitting people worse, we're seeing that more people are depending on food and material relief organisations. And something that Sue's done this council term has been to push council to look at what facilities we have or require for food and material relief organisations to be based. Is that the
Yeah, we've got one more
okay, yeah. So, anyway, in summary, there's some work that council's doing in this space, being led by the community particularly here. That's exciting. But I think it's always going to be a challenge to make. I think the community's ambitions will always be higher than what council can provide, and part of our role will be echoing community calls to other levels of government to prioritise this.
Super, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience about the issue of food security? But does anybody have any questions about food security? No? Okay.
Maybe.
Go for it. The microphone.
Good evening. Hello, and Charmaine. So with food security, we used to have a huge community pantry in Pulford, and then a number of smaller pantries that sprung up, but they were all individual efforts trying to address the gap. And I think it was fun. The food came from a private, Coles and so on. Is that something that you have the ability to influence, as in, these Coles and the Aldis and the Woolies, or it needs to be more corporate, speaking to HQ, and that's outside the council, more for my information. So, do I need to go as an individual member, knocking on the doors of Norco with Aldi and going, hey, can we have a partnership, or is it something we can arrange at a high level, facilitated by the council? Thank you.
I think both are possible. I think part of what council does is, one of the things we do is support the flag group, which is representatives of different community groups coming together and working out, what's happening with the food systems and food security. And so through that group, council could potentially help connect that group with different suppliers or distributors. Maybe that's already happening. You wouldn't get
Sorry, I was just going to say, FLAG has now ceased, the funding has ended, so there is no more FLAG, unfortunately.
I thought that was continuing, okay.
Well, it's continuing, the work that FLAG has set in place is continuing until December, and then the new food system strategy kicks in, and there is currently no funding for that particular project, which is a real shame because it was a really good project.
Yeah, like something that we need to take up with in the new council.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't think I really need to say anything more. I think Adam's right, both are possible. And I think, what has been, especially during COVID, but also not just during COVID, before COVID as well as current situation, there are lots of different groups which have popped up at different times which have just taken the ball into their own hands to go and make the approaches. But also I think council can play a role of assisting groups and such also. I think council should play a role in this space. Sorry, I forgot to use the mic, sorry. Very sorry. I agree with Adam that it is both individuals and groups councils can make the approach to, whereas, you know, food companies, etc., to provide food, because they do chuck out an enormous amount of food, and even maybe not just food, actually other things that people need as well. But I think council does need to play more of a role in trying to help unite people. I think there will always be community groups that will take initiative themselves. I think people had more time to take initiatives during COVID because of lockdowns. So people did, you know, people really went for it. But then once people started to have to go back to work in offices and other workplaces, then it wasn't possible to keep some of those projects going. But I do think council needs to maintain, have a focus on this. And at the moment, there's not a single level of government that helps with providing venues for organisations that provide emergency food collect, not a single level of government. So money from federal government goes to the big organisations, and the big organisations that are funded refer people to 100% volunteer-run organisations which get zero government funding. And I think that is, we have a crisis, and no level of government should step away from that. We need to address it in a multitude of ways.
Thanks very much, Sue. A question that we received from someone who's not able to be here is on time. Our understanding is, the person who asked, their understanding is that the role of a councillor is only a part-time position, and so unless you have independent means, that means that you may very well have to take on a second job. How would you manage your time, balancing your obligations sitting on council and any additional obligations that you may have in relation to work?
Yes, so so councillors are paid part-time, they have an allowance, and the privilege of being mayor is to get paid full-time, so you can do it as your full-time thing. So I've had a great year. We have to focus on one thing rather than juggling lots of things. When I was a councillor, I'd work 3 days a week. I actually worked for the First People's Assembly of Victoria. So I would work a part-time job and then kind of try and keep 2 days free for council work. But often council work is in the evenings or on the weekends. We meet in the evenings, we have our briefings in the evenings. There's a question for Lance, but for me, that's my intention, is to probably go back to a 3-day-a-week job when I'm a councillor, if I get re-elected again. And you have a bit of flexibility, because you often have meetings and briefings in the evenings. You do have some flexibility during those weekdays to go and meet with groups, to get across different issues, that kind of thing. I guess the privilege of having done the job before is you kind of know, you've got a lot of work in the background as well, you've got background information, you've seen issues for a number of years now, and so you have more experience than me on this. So you it's a bit of a cheat sheet, which means you can then work out where you can best spend your time, and most effectively spend your time as a councillor. When I was first elected at the start of this term, I was like, whoa, this is all new, a whole new system that I'm learning. Part of the reason I'm running again is I feel like I understand the system, and I want to put that knowledge to good use for getting good outcomes.
Thank you. Sue.
So, yes, it is always a juggle with time. And, usually what I try to do is spend 2 days a week in the north to, focus on council issues, and the other 3 days at work. But it's always going to be a juggle. But I guess it's sort of a juggle I've always experienced ever since I became active around lots of different social justice or union works' rights issues. So I've been sort of actively involved in different campaigns probably since the early 80s, and it's probably a lot easier when you do white collar work. When I was a bus driver, it's much more difficult because it was pretty full on. but I was also active in different campaigns after work and so forth, or in your breaks. We used to have a spread of hours with a break in the middle of the day. So it's something I've always had to juggle, most of my adult life. So in a sense, being a counsellor is no different to that. You're always juggling, and sometimes you do have to do late night things or weekend things, because you do have to make yourself available to meet up with residents when they need you, and that has to revolve not only around your time but around when they're available because of if there's shift work or whatever. So there's the formal part of council, but the meetings and briefings and council meetings and all of that. But the other important part of being a councillor is being out and about in the community, because even if it might be a fairly informal kind of community event, often people come up to you to talk to you about different little things, and you start to build up a picture of what life's like in different pockets of the community.
Thank you. Keep that. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions from the floor around that area? Oh, hello. Sorry.
Right, testing, here we go again. All right, my name's John. Have a history with Sue. I said to Sue probably 2 elections ago that I'll vote for the person that I see in the community, and Sue's the only person I have ever seen from council, treating the streets and the byways of Pulford. So I really commend you for that. You were the hardest of any councillor. It's regrettable that these 2 people who want our votes haven't bothered to turn up. Thank you, Adam, Mr. Mayor, but I'm afraid you're still a poor substitute for us learning what these people want to bring to the council. So, again, you've got my vote. Thank you.
Alicia.
Is it microphone? Not yet.
Alicia.
It's on now.
Yes, all good.
You can hear me. Okay, thank you. Thanks, and thank you both, Sue and Adam, for being here. And I say Charmaine for hosting. And I also thank the 4 organisations for organising tonight. I'd like to know, and it's kind of not really appropriate asking you two, being representative of the council, but why did the council spend so much over budget on Hoskin Reserve? And related to Hoskin Reserve, why is it, originally it's been a community park, as in given to the community. However, there's no development at all established within the entire spaces of Hoskin Reserve. Why is it that soccer is just manipulated and made council go over budget? Thanks. Please. Sorry. That was a please.
Well, I certainly didn't want the project to go over budget, but I feel the whole question of Hoskin Reserve, I feel that the council made, some people here might not know the history of what happened at Hoskin Reserve, but my personal feeling is there were some dodgy things that happened, basically, because the council, maybe about this point of the council elections last time, residents suddenly discovered there was a secret plan that they had not been told about to install a synthetic pitch on Hoskin Reserve in North Coburg in the Melbourne area, for people who don't know it. And so residents campaigned in the midst of COVID lockdowns, council caretaker period, to fight the synthetic soccer pitch. So there are some massive issues that have happened in council, which I've never got to the bottom of. But we fought back, and I moved the motion to get rid of this synthetic soccer pitch. Other councillors supported that motion. It was a divided vote on council, and then we had a fight, and I initiated the motion to keep the eastern field for the community open space, because there was a view that all parts of the reserve would be taken by the soccer club. And I'm certainly not anti-soccer by any stretch of the imagination. I would like to see the community divisions heal. But I think the whole torturous process that happened with Hussaan Reserve, where the community wasn't consulted in the beginning, really is what led to the fact that this project has gone massively over budget. You know, there's an element of construction materials going up in price, but I think the fact that really there was a total stuff-up at the beginning of the project, where with the community not being consulted about the project, I think is really what led to budget blowouts.
Will this council learn from that mistake, do you think?
I hope so. I very much hope so. If I get re-elected, I will definitely try and stop something like that happening again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Adam, would you like to add anything?
Okay. I agree with a lot of what Sue said. I think, Alicia, you're part of that fight, and it was good to go to the opening, and I was a bit worried about going to that opening when we've had bodies, so different groups, one different. It was a huge fight. It's a lot of process. It's been more than 4 years. It's been more than 4 years away. I do feel like that residents who fought so hard to keep things, maybe people would disagree in space, but not everyone's feeling the same way. But I heard from a few different voices at that event, and it felt like people were proud that they had some wins, and whether that was a soccer club or whether it was a local residents group. But I think council has a lot to learn through that process, and council made some big errors, and that came to light just before the last election. And yeah, to the support of community residents and Sue's motions as well, to try and make sure there was a bit of a fairer balance in that space between organised sport and passive recreation for residents.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Matt, do you have a question?
Ian Mack, I'm with the Millicent Progress Group. The ALP has changed the election process for local government. They've spent big on advertising like billboards and repeated letterboxing. And they've done away with the democracy sausage.
Yes.
By introducing postal voting, they are discouraging participation in community democracy. Will council be strongly advocating for postal voting to be optional, at least for councils, so that we in the community, because local government is the local level for local participation, where people get their first taste of engaging in democracy. And respectfully, I know that council laws and council had nothing to do with it, except the absent ALP candidate, who I had hoped would answer these sorts of questions. So, will council be strongly advocating for a swing back of the pendulum towards getting better democratic outcomes?
Are you asking for a voting ceremony? Like an actual go to the local school and vote?
Yes, I'm asking for a return of attendance voting where people get together and they participate in democracy.
I would be keen to support something like that, of council advocating to the state government, but I think it's unlikely to be successful unless Merribek can get a group of councillors, a group of different councils to also join it in advocating. Like, I think just one off by itself, it's unlikely to have very much impact, because I think the postal voting, you know, I think it has a lot of problems. Single member wards, I also think, are designed to support the big parties and limits the diversity on council. But I think the postal voting, I think last election, where it was the first time Merribek had postal voting, there were a lot more informal votes. Because most of the world doesn't have preferential voting. Australia is quite unique, or very few countries have preferential voting. And also I found in Donocking during this election campaign, people are thinking, because in the Senate, you used to be able to just go vote one above the lines, that people were thinking, yes, we can just vote one and don't have to number in all the preferences. So I think you do need, I mean, one thing, when people have to go to a polling booth, whether it's early voting or on the actual day itself, you do get a chance to chat to people, and maybe you might even find out about candidates you weren't aware of, or quiz people, because a lot of the election cards, they don't say very much about what people really, often they're very general statements. They don't really indicate what you would, a councillor candidate would actually do if they got elected. So I think it is good to be able to quiz your candidate about what they really stand for on a lot of issues.
Yeah, I think it was a bad move that the Labor state government shifted us to single-member wards and then also forced us to do postal voting. One of Merribek, or Bolton at the time, was one of only 4 out of like 79 councils in Victoria that still did attendance council voting, and I think that partly speaks to the spirit of our community. Like, we're an engaged community, we love being involved in civic participation, democracy, and it's one of the impacts of shifting to the single member ward is that the VEC, you know, the commission running the elections, they had to bring forward a lot of their deadlines, because they said, rather than running, say, 200 elections across all the different councils, for all of the member wards, we're now actually running 700 elections, because we're, you know, Merribek went from 3 elections and 3 multi-member wards to 11 elections, so more than triple, right? And so they had to cut off the enrolment date a lot earlier, which means people who've moved since then find themselves in this limbo where maybe they can't go back to their own property and get their ballot, and even if they updated their address, it's not going to work, because the cut-off was at the start of August when they're voting at the end of October. So there's been these unintended consequences that I don't think Labor thought through when they shifted to this model, and I think democracy suffers for it, both because you have less diversity in terms of parties and people represented on councils in a single member ward system, but also you lose that spirit of kind of, we're all in this together, we're all voting on the same day, we're going to have our democracy sausage. I've been at tram stops talking to people and nobody knows that it's only postal votes, because I think the last election when we shifted to postal was only because of COVID, which makes sense, right? And so they're like, I can't wait to vote on the 26th. I'm like, no, you've got to get your ballot in the post before then. So in terms of your question about advocating, I think we've got to keep making the case that multi-member wards are better. And also, by the way, that the state government changed some of the rural councils to multi-member wards as they changed the metro councils to single-member wards. So there's no logic there. Okay. So we've got to advocate, but I also feel like it's going to be a hard thing to do.
We probably only have time for like one more question.
Any last Maggie?
Hi, look, I've put another map that shows likely heat wave impacts and flood impacts in Merribek. This comes from the climate adaptation game, but it's an interesting way to think about what we can expect in the coming years. And it's interesting to see how this ward in particular is affected. What other mitigation and adaptation measures that you'd want to see council bring in, bearing
Thanks for asking that question. I really want to play the adaptation game, by the way. Like councils, circulating that and people are using it.
Very good. I'll often host sessions.
Oh, okay. Should go on to the next one. The reality is the climate crisis is worsening, temperatures are rising, we're getting more extreme weather events more often. And so I think all of that means that we actually need to physically change a lot of our streets to deal with increased temperatures. So we need to plant more trees so that it actually provides shade and helps cool the city. We also need to create new parks because they're like cooling zones, as you all know. But we also need to improve things like drainage because, what was a once in 100 flood event or inundation event is now going to, once in 100 years is now going to be 1 in 10 years, for example. Don't quote me on that stat, but you know what I mean, it's getting worse. So with that, I think comes opportunity because if we need to physically change our streets to make them safer and cooler, we should also be making it easier for people to walk and ride and use low emissions forms of transport. So for me, they're really linked. Like the climate crisis demands we change to deal with climate impacts, but we also don't want to make climate change worse. So we should use this opportunity, this need for change, to actually help shift to a low emission society where we're not adding fuel to the fire of climate change. So, when we're looking at a street and saying we need more drainage, we need to also say, can we put in a bike lane here? Will this better connect to the network? Will this mean more people can get out of their cars and onto their bikes? One last thing I'll say is council has started doing climate resilience work where actually internally officers are really trying to grapple with what are climate impacts on the infrastructure in our community and therefore what plans of ours need to change to help deal with those. It's council leading, we're one of the leading councils in this space. Really pleased council's taking that on. The hard bit will be, once we've got all the data, how do we find the money to invest in all these changes that we need? But that's the part we've got to take on.
I think thanks Maggie, I think actually climate hasn't really featured much in this election, I think, but it is very critical, even though it hasn't featured in the election. I think there are some things where I think clearly an urban forest is really important, and I moved the first motion for an urban forest in Merribek. But I think one of the important things is not just targets, but I understand there is a lack of maintenance of street trees, and because Merribek is focused just on targets of getting X number of trees planted, the resources aren't there to maintain the trees. So sometimes the trees, fail very quickly, and sometimes they get vandalised and so forth as well. But we actually need street trees that survive so they can provide shade, and just an artificial target isn't enough by itself if the trees can't be maintained. I also think Merribek has to push back against attempts by the state government to fast-track development, because one of the things that's also affecting our urban environment is the fact that houses with gardens and trees, established trees that provide shade and ground that can absorb water when there's big storms, are getting concreted over and massive amount of development. And council has over the years made some changes to its planning scheme to force developers to plant, not much, but a street tree. But the problem is, with all the fast tracking of development, then the decision gets taken out of council's hands, and there's big pressure to just wholesale allow developers to do whatever they like, which could mean the end of trees. We also need just two last things. We need to phase gas out of pools, and we need cooling centres, not just relying on public libraries to provide a cool space in heat waves.
Thank you. Question?
Yeah, question.
Sorry.
So, in relation to this, I'd just like to remind our Greens representative that in your haste to get everyone out of their cars and onto their push bikes and to walk, there are many, many people, particularly in Faulkner, who are just too old or too ill to do that. So in your haste to bring in these other strategies, please remember that two things. Number one, many people cannot get out of their cars because of their physical or age or whatever. And, you know, I mean, I drive a hybrid, so I try to do my best, right? So we should be encouraging that sort of stuff as well as the other sorts of things.
Yeah. And I said more people, not everyone. You know, I don't expect everybody to ride a bike, but there is one of the barriers to more people riding a bike is they don't feel safe. So there's people that want to ride a bike, they don't feel safe to. There was safe cycling infrastructure, they would, and that's particularly women who are like interested cyclists, but not quite there yet in terms of feeling comfortable riding with their kids or just riding by themselves. So I want more people to be able to do that, but I understand that there will always be people who drive, and I drove here tonight, you know, I'm not. But yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just say one little thing related to that? Council owns community buses, and they used to be used, and still are to some extent used, to take people who can't drive or get around to go shopping or do essential tasks. Often it was a best kept secret, so a lot of people who needed them didn't know about them. But I don't see why, like in a suburb like Faulkner, where there's a lot of people in Faulkner who walk very long distances because maybe they've only got one car in the family, or there's not insufficient public transport. I don't see why council couldn't use its community bus to do a little shuttle service around Faulkner, because you know, the links, the buses, it's just not sufficient. And I think if people got to know there was a little shuttle bus that came around regularly, then some people might not drive to Bonwick Street, and you might actually reduce the traffic. I don't see why council couldn't do. I did raise this at one point and I got shouted down, but I don't see why council shouldn't do it. I know council doesn't like doing things it sees as being state government responsibility, but I think this is a perfectly logical thing that council could do.
Thank you, sir. Although I'm not entirely convinced that the Facebook group will be happy with this, because what would they complain about if not parking on Bonwick Street?
Yep.
That's all that seems to happen. Sorry, I don't know your name, but yeah.
So my question is, so I'm a lifetime resident of this area, and I also work as an Uber delivery person. I ride my bike around the neighbourhoods and get food. And obviously up here in the north, we don't have the same sort of cycle infrastructure or even necessary pedestrian infrastructure that other parts of the municipality have. So what I wanted to ask both of you was, what are your plans, what do you see as the future of active transport for walking and riding in Faulkner and Coburg North specifically?
We've done a Faulkner kind of transport study as a council. I think you also asked us for that in Coburg.
Yeah, Coburg North
as well. Yeah. But I don't think that's been reported back to us. No. So there's some work kind of going on at officer level where they're looking at recommendations. I think Faulkner is this kind of unique little, it's because it's its own little hub that's like, there's a few entrances in and out, and I know that traffic gets really bad on those entrances in and out, but it is also like a really ideal spot for walking and riding around, you know, if people felt more safe. So I don't have a specific project in mind for up here, but my kind of view is we want, not every street will have a bike lane, not every street needs a bike lane. You need to have a safe network where people can get where they need to go. That means things need to be connected, and that includes Faulkner. But it's a very specific idea for Faulkner, it's just completely gone out of my head. But yeah, I think part of it is the infrastructure. The other part of it is, because it's such a diverse community up here, one of the programs councils run this term, and it's actually came from the bicycle user group, the Merribek bicycle user group. They said, there's particularly Muslim women who can't drive cars, but still want to be able to get out of their house and like do errands or take their kids to places. And so council gave Merribek a grant to run kind of how to ride bike lessons for people who've never ridden bikes, and particularly Muslim women. And it's given them like a ticket to freedom that they hadn't had before. And so, yes, I guess my answer is there's infrastructure changes we need to make, but there's also ways we can support people. I guess there's behaviour change programs that we run as well. And so I think that program was a trial this year, and council's now just funding it as part of its base budget because it was so successful. It gives, more people riding bikes, which is good for climate, but also it's a whole new world, I guess, for people who didn't have transport options or couldn't drive before.
Thank you. Sue, would you like to?
Well, I guess firstly, there's some very dangerous parts of the area which are actually controlled by big roads. Council doesn't control them, but I think there is a need for council to fully understand the extent of injuries and accidents, especially pedestrians, but also bikes as well, along Sydney Road, Faulkner and North Coburg, and also to advocate for the right sorts of solutions. You know, there have been particularly a number of pedestrian accidents at the corner of Bakers Road and Sydney Road, and but all of the intersections, there have been some terrible car crashes on the corner of Lawn Street and Sydney Road. So all of these different areas we've had some terrible crashes. And so there does need to be some strong advocacy from council about those issues. Then there are issues such as even established bike infrastructure, like the uphill bike path, needs more lighting in the north. When it's raining, people often can't see because the bike path gets flooded and you just can't see because there's very little lighting along the bike path up in the north. But we also need to fix the link between Merribek and Hume Council area in terms of bike paths and things. The missing link, although that's been held up not by council but by the various authorities, water and various other authorities. Then there's sort of issues like, I believe there need to be traffic lights and there needs to be some sort of working out of some sort of solution, might not be full solution about the traffic in Bonwick Street. But certainly I think traffic lights at that pedestrian crossing. There's a call for a safe cycling route to Faulkner Primary School and to also try and sort out the traffic situation in the afternoon. Not sure about, if that's time or 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay, already.
We're going to just do 1 minute responses to the next few questions.
Okay, yep.
Thank you. Grant?
Yeah, just on bike infrastructure. There's a lot of bike lanes marked on roads that are just marked lanes, and you drive down at dusk or just after dusk, and there's cars parked all along them, which means that bikes are having to duck out into traffic to get past parked cars in what's a noted bike lane. What could possibly be done about enforcement and actual, enforcement of existing infrastructure that is dedicated for bicycle use? I'm thinking particularly Plumpton Avenue in Glenroy.
Yeah.
Which avenue? Oh, Plumpton Avenue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's an issue everywhere where there's marked bike lanes that aren't physically separated, right? I know the gold standard is separated infrastructure, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of the problems is people have change the colour of the side of the road and said it's a bike lane when it's not really a bike lane. Like, protected or separated cycling infrastructure can be the difference in making more people feel comfortable and safe to get on bikes. In terms of enforcement, is that a police matter though for a car parked in a bike lane?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then it would be council would. Ideally, we would have a network that is a separated cycling network that disconnected, that then it means that you don't have to have these fights over bike lanes or parking space on every street. You just know on some streets, these are the cycling streets, some streets you can park your cars there. That's great, it doesn't have to be every street. With enforcement, I think maybe you could snap and solve it to council and they could pass it on to the police. I don't know if there's an easy answer, but I definitely hear that problem. And then another problem we've had is construction happening in bike lanes as well. That is a council matter. But my time's up, sorry.
I actually think a lot of these issues are very difficult because, you know, just because governments over the years destroyed public transport and forced people into cars to get around, that's really what happened. Australia followed the US and destroyed trams in Brisbane, where I come from, and well, they burnt the trams to force people into cars and buses. And the way in which work now is so casualised has also forced more people into cars who might prefer to actually bike around. So there are, and it is very difficult retrofitting streets for, say, bike infrastructure. I think if we were going to resolve the issue, you're talking about Boundary Road in Glenroy is also
Plumpton Avenue.
Another example, and
Yeah.
Plumpton Avenue, I know those areas well. I think you'd have to decide you're going to install no parking, no standing signs actually in those areas. And so I think you'd have to work out which streets you do that in order to prioritise bikes.
Thank you, Sue. Brilliant. Brilliant, and then Alicia.
I suppose just zooming out a little bit from specific issues, we've talked a lot tonight about things that council can do to support its residents, but you also sometimes hear comments from people that council should just stick to roads, rates and rubbish. What would you say to people that have that opinion?
Well, I would say that council doesn't control roads, rates and rubbish. Roads are shared between federal government, state government and local councils. Rates, well, state government's got a rate cap on it, so council doesn't really have that much control over rates. And to increase development also in an area drives up rates, drives up valuations of land, not because people necessarily want it, but that's what the impact of it. And then rubbish, a lot of elements of rubbish, some elements are controlled by council and some by state government. But there are also a lot of other things that council provides that people aren't even really aware of unless they have to use the service, from libraries to playgrounds to maternal and child health, aged care in the home. There's so many services, and there are some right-wingers who want council to get rid of all those services and cut rates. So anyway, I think social justice is another important element of council.
Thank you, Sue. Adam.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sue said. Councils aren't roads, rates and rubbish, and we haven't been since the 70s, apparently. One of the Greens candidates is doing research, and he said that was back when it changed, and hasn't been the same since. I think on international issues like Israel's war in Gaza, I'm really proud that council's taken a stand. You know, it's our community, it's an issue that's clearly affecting so many people in our community, and particularly this community, right? People have family and friends from all over the world, but a lot of people have family and friends living in the Middle East, and every day they're waking up hoping that their relatives or their friends haven't died in the war. And so when there's pain is in our community, they look to their representatives to see themselves echoed and represented, really. And so I'm really proud that council passed Sue's motion back in November, and then last year we were the first council in Victoria to show that way. And yes, anyway, I just think that is a crucial part of our work, is to represent our community and have the community see themselves represented in us.
Thank you. One last question, maybe two last questions, if we're really quick. Alicia? Alicia, did you have a question?
When you're talking about bike paths, I know that the City of Yarra, like on Wellington Street, has bike lanes. Then the boulder, like stuff that cars can't go into, park into the bike lane space. So there's the bike path separated with what are those things on the floor that
Like the curb things?
Sorry?
The curb things, you mean? Or
bollards?
Copenhagen style lanes.
Then the car park, then there's the space to drive.
Yes.
I know that the City of Yarra have done it. I don't know if that's been with state government and can Merribek Council meet with state government to have a suggestion to have, as Max says, a compensation. Copenhagen, bike path. So and for security, there's still deaths on the roads. Bikers, cyclists.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The separated cycling infrastructure where cars and bikes are separated. That's the point of it. Makes people feel safer. But you don't also need separated bike lanes everywhere. Like one of the best streets to ride on in Melbourne is Canning Street, and that's not got separated bike lane. Canning Street in Carlton. Yeah. And partly that's not about separated bike lanes. That's about modal filtering, where you close off one end of a road to cars, which means fewer cars use it as a rat run, which means you lower the traffic volumes on the road, which means you've got fewer cars actually interrupting lots of cyclists. So there's a few ways you can make streets safer for people. It doesn't, like separated bike lanes are an important part of the solution, but you can also have kind of off-street bike lanes, or you can have kind of this modal filtering, which cars can still get to where they need to go, just maybe a slightly longer way around, which cuts the through traffic, which makes things safer.
Thank you. I think one thing in, this is probably Melbourne-wide, not just Merribek, is that, there's a cycling network, but I think people who don't regularly cycle, actually, it's almost invisible. Like the signage of what is, what is the principal bicycle network is actually pretty invisible to people who don't regularly cycle. And I think the signage, is totally inadequate. So that then sometimes when there's a proposal about improving bike infrastructure on a particular street, and sometimes actually bike infrastructure does create inconvenience, or there might be incompatibility. It's very difficult retrofitting our streets. There's a lot of complications, and you have to try and mitigate for any problematic impacts. But I think people would be more understanding of things if they understood that certain streets have been designated to be like bike freeways or, like major routes for bikes. And I don't think that's a very high consciousness. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sue. Last question.
Actually, it's just an add-on to this. We're lucky in Thornton.
Question. I will happily hear your comment, and I'm sure the candidates will too. But I think, just for brevity, it's 6:18. We said we close at 6:30, but I want to give a little bit of time at the end for you to come and speak to the candidates or proxy candidates on an informal basis. So we need to wrap it up here. But first I want to say thank you very much to the North Coburg Rebels Club and Visitor Dogs for hosting us.
For doing all your great work and facilitating all this. It's just a small gift to you.
And actually, there are so many people who you have not seen, who are behind the scenes, who have made this possible. possible. There's Matt and Grant, Brilliant and Az, who have helped with tech stuff, Dee, who has come in a number of times to show off this place. What a great facility this is. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to Merribek Progress Group, to Climate Action Merribek, to Sustainable Folk Now, and thank you to the volunteers of Merry Food Hub for getting me out of the hub when I said I needed to get out of the hub to come here, rockstar. So thank you also very much for your attendance, because it'd just be me, the candidate sitting here having a yarn, not that's a bad thing. But thank you very much for bringing your questions and for participating in this. It's really vital that we participate if we want proper democracy, right? Otherwise, what's the point of having this lovely thing called a democracy sausage, which we don't have in Malaysia, right? We get shot by water cannons in Malaysia. Come on. Thank you to Councillor Sue Bolton, to Councillor Alan Pulford for taking the time out of Friday evening to come and answer questions.
Can we thank you, Charmaine, for initiating this whole thing, because I think it's been really hard for community groups to organise candidate meetings with single member wards, and I think it has been a challenge. So Brunswick's had a whole lot of meetings, but the Coburg meeting didn't really come off. Lack of venues, actually lack of council venues for these things is a problem. And I just think it's been a challenge, and I'm glad that you initiated this. I know you initiated, that you made the initial call, but also all the groups and all the volunteers who've worked to make this a success as well.
I would encourage you to speak to the councillors until they tell you that they want to go home, which maybe now, I don't know. But I would encourage you to get your word in, because democracy, come on.